Have you ever had one of those days, like Habakkuk in the first reading, when everything seemed to be going wrong and all you could see was violence, discord, strife, hatred, enmity, and you don't think God's hearing you? In fact, you might even wonder, is there a God? Pope Francis, in his recent encyclical letter called Lumen Fidei, the Light of Faith, said this about our contemporary culture. Quote, "In contemporary culture, we often tend to consider the only real truth to be that of technology. Truth is what we succeed in building and measuring by our scientific know-how. Truth is what works and what makes life easier and more comfortable." But he continues, in the end, what we are left with is relativism, in which the question of universal truth, and ultimately this means the question of God, is no longer relevant. In this regard, we can speak of a massive amnesia in our contemporary culture. The question of truth is really a question of memory, deep memory, for it deals with something prior to ourselves and can succeed in uniting us in a way that transcends our petty and limited individual consciousness. It is a question about the origin of all that is. The question about the origin of all that is. That is to say, being, our very existence, caused by whom or what? Think about it. I was reading a book that was given to me by a professor from UNN not too long ago about genetics. And the research that's been done in genetics, studying our human gene pool for the world, has come to the conclusion that all our genes can be traced back to one woman thousands of years ago in East Africa. Wow. We've been saying that for centuries. And the scientists now are coming to the same conclusion, genetically, by research. Okay, so we go back to that woman, and we say, where did she come from? Who caused her? We know our parents were caused by their parents and their parents and their parents and so on and so forth. So we've got to go back. Who caused that original woman who gave us our gene pool, if you want to use the modern language? And you might say, well, maybe it was a development, all right, through various creatures, fine, all right, then who caused that first one, right? And when we get back to the beginning, we call that the uncaused cause, which commonly we say is called God. The unmoved mover, the uncaused cause, whatever way you want to refer to the origin of our species. And that person is seeking a relationship with us. In fact, just a couple of days ago in Assisi on the Feast of St. Francis, Friday, the 4th of October, our Holy Father said this in his address to the Franciscans and the people there in Assisi. Quote, "The first thing St. Francis tells us is this, that being a Christian means having a living relationship with the person of Jesus. It means putting on Christ and being conformed to him." Putting on Christ, living Christ. We do that initially through baptism, but very often the grace goes dormant inside us. That's why St. Paul to Timothy says, stir up the gift that has been given you. Stir into flame, right? That gift. Don't let it just remain dormant, or you will lose the grace of a living relationship with a person who loves you infinitely and who wants to draw you into relationship. But instead, we listen to the news and we get overwhelmed by the attack in the Navy Yard, the attack at a sporting event in Boston, children being gassed in Syria, children being destroyed in the womb, elderly people being left hungry, and on and on and on the news reports go that discourage us. But there are reasons for hope, reasons that we must pay attention to. Today we had the annual Rosary Rally, which is in commemoration of October the 7th, the feast of the Victory of Our Lady of the Rosary. Now, what is that? In 1571, Europe had been decimated by religious wars. The Catholic-Protestant division had happened earlier in that century. The nations were divided, and now the Turks were coming, advancing on Europe from the east. And they were coming up into the Gulf near Greece. The Holy Father realized that the people were divided, they had to come together, so he called on 3 monarchs in Europe to send ships. And though there were far fewer than the Turkish fleet, the Holy Father called for a day, October the 7th, 1571, in which all the people would gather together wherever they were, village to village, church to church, pray the rosary, offer petitions, various kinds of novenas. And what happened? The winds came. The Turkish ships were turned back, and Europe was saved. It looked like it was the end for Europe. But there was intervention because people united in prayer in an impossible situation. And if you look through church history, you will find time and time again when clouds of darkness seem to be hovering over the church and over the world, people prayed, people were united, and things began to change. I give you a couple of examples in our own day and time of hope. Just a few weeks ago, you will recall, the United States was threatening to bomb Syria. Now, it's bad enough we have a civil war going on, another one in the Middle East, and as you know, they seem to go on and on and on. Now, it appeared we would go into a world war. Russians on one side, Americans on the other side, and on it looked. And our Holy Father Francis called for a peace vigil. Do you remember that? And I asked you all to join in praying wherever you were on that day. And what happened? Within a matter of days, peace initiatives, diplomatic initiatives opened up that seemed impossible before. Do you remember that? A world war did not ensue because people were united in prayer and in fasting for another way. Another example, maybe you were there. Just about a month ago, there was a speaker at UNM in the student union to a packed union, a woman by the name of Abby Johnson. Abby, who grew up a Protestant, Abby, who believed herself to be pro-life, eventually had an unplanned pregnancy. She went to Planned Parenthood, terminated the pregnancy, and then they asked her to volunteer. She started getting involved. She got a job, eventually became manager, and was producing the largest number of abortions in her region. I think it was in the Austin area. One day, the doctor who was doing these abortions asked her to follow on the monitor to make sure he did something particularly a certain way, which she had never seen. She was actually watching the ultrasound, and when she saw the child seek to flee from the advances of the doctor, a light clicked on, and she realized what was happening. This is human life. The child felt pain. She walked out of that Planned Parenthood center and never went back. She now is exposing what she had been involved in and enlightening the eyes of young people. Now she's trying to work with them to bring hope to both mother and child instead of what she'd been involved in the past. So there was a great conversion to life. Here's another one. There's a Catholic intergenerational center in Milwaukee I recently heard about, run by, I believe, the Sisters of St. Francis. And what they're doing is they're bringing little children, preschool, so 1, 2, and 3-year-olds, together with elderly people for a 12-hour daycare. In addition, they take care of those who may be handicapped physically or mentally. So you have folks in wheelchairs, you have little bitty kids who are being taught to sing for the elderly who see light and love and joy, perhaps for the first time, because so many of our elderly people have been marginalized and put to the side as useless. This Catholic Intergenerational Center is bringing hope, and it's also helping little ones to see that it's normal to be around elderly people, to be around people that are handicapped, and to love one another. Do you see the advances? Next month, another reason for hope. We have an opportunity to ban late-term abortions right here in Albuquerque from 20 weeks on. Finally, it's going to be on a ballot. We can do something about it. And then today, we celebrate not one, not two, I think this is the first time in my 30 years as a priest, 3 couples who are celebrating their 40th anniversary at the same time. That's extraordinary. It's a witness to the beauty and the sanctity of matrimony, fidelity, commitment, choosing to love one another. I bet they could tell you that the emotions go up and down, do they not? Right? Over 40 years? But you still chose to remain committed to one another, because marriage is a choice. When you come to the altar, you choose to vow yourselves before Almighty God, and each day you were to choose again. Just as I begin each day, Lord, I thank you for this new day, and I renew my vows to love you more today, so each couple, you should do the same. I renew my vow to love my spouse, fill in the blank, more today than I did yesterday, and you build up a covenant of love. Because, people talk about we fell out of love. If you're climbing a mountain through matrimony, and the mountaintop is heaven, your mission is to get each other there, you're not going to be able to coast up a mountain, right? You can't just take the vows and say, well, we're going to coast from the day of the wedding. It doesn't work. What happens? How do you coast? You coast down a mountain, right? You will not coast up. You have to choose to hike up together, right? And we have 3 couples witnessing 40 years each. Altogether, I think that's 120 years of matrimony. Pope Francis, who was speaking to the Catholic Medical Association and International Association in Rome a couple of weeks ago, said this: we have a mentality of profit and a culture of waste, which now enslaves the hearts and minds of many, and it has a very high cost. It requires the elimination of human beings, especially if they're physically or socially weaker. The first right of the human person is life. Be witnesses and speakers of this culture of life. Your being Catholic entails greater responsibility, first of all, to yourself, for the effort to be consistent with the Christian vocation, and then to contemporary culture, to help recognize the transcendent dimension in human life, the imprint of the creative work of God from the very first moment of conception. This is a commitment to the new evangelization that often requires going against the current, paying the price in person. The Lord counts on you to spread the gospel of life. Unquote. Yes, there are reasons for hope. The battle at Lepanto off the coast of Greece ended in a victory because people were united in prayer and intention. We are people who must unite today in faith in order to get through the challenges that are set before us. Just before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, in his final address, this is what he said: I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. I have a dream this afternoon that the brotherhood of man will become a reality. And with this faith, I will go out and carve a tunnel of hope from a mountain of despair. I will carve out a tunnel of hope from a mountain of despair. No matter how difficult the challenges we face, be not afraid. As Pope John Paul often said, we can carve out a tunnel of hope. And so I now invite these three couples, Steve and Ann Pink, Johnny and Darlene Moya, and Joe and Susie Chato, to come forward for a special blessing.